Welcome, everybody. It's Armtia Aquila, and we're back with two vets and a civilian, my longtime cohort, Jerry, and new but not so new, Liana. And today we're revisiting some of the points that I made on my video, What I Wish the Trans Activists Knew About Advocating for the Trans Activism. Before we get into the deep subject matter, I do want to lay the foundation of why are we talking about this and what credentials do we bring to the table. For me, I'm trans. This shit directly affects my life, and I'm tired of people fucking it up because it's gotten to the point where screwing the pooch is actually dangerous. Not just for me, because I can take care of myself, but there are other people out there who are less adept at dealing with multiple threats, and all of the things that go with that. As far as my credentials, I was a public affairs non-commissioned officer for the 101st Combat Aviation Brigade. I got journalism, public relations, and crisis comms experience. And then I got out and got a bachelor's in public relations. And I'll open it to the floor.
Are we introducing
ourselves? Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, let's go to Jerry, because I know you have to do your disclaimer.
Yep. My name's Jerry. My background is I was a civilian journalist for a little over 19 years. I have a public affairs background from the DOD. I am still serving, so anything I say is my opinion only, and does not represent anybody, no state, local, federal agency. These are my opinions and what I've seen.
Thank you.
All right, I'll ditto that with me. I hate introducing myself this way, but it's relevant here. Award-winning documentary producer and writer. So I know something about, laying out a case and persuading. I did work on the early days of televising Pride, the Pride Parade up here in Canada. We did a lot of outreach in that period about what we call gay straight alliance stuff. But also I am a peer counselor. My comments do not reflect my clients. I do have a surprising number of gay and trans clients. And so, I'll anonymize some of the things that they've talked to me about. And then I was quoted in the Washington Post about the whole Hogwarts legacy thing.
Oh, no.
They needed somebody to do a counterpoint, and nobody would. And so I'm like, all right, I'll be Voldemort, and it was surprisingly a nothing burger, which was shocking. And I mean, we'll get to the difference between, online and real life, but that was because I was bracing and there was squat. So interesting bit of feedback there, but
okay.
Yeah.
All right. And now
we're all
off.
like, here we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't made a butt joke yet. And so the rhythm's all off.
Well, hang on to your butts. Are we going the chili route again?
Oh, God,
No. I'll save it. There's for people who haven't watched us before, I cope with humor. And so there's been a lot of that. There's been a lot of that going around lately, because it does seem right that things are kind of what is the appropriate military analogy for the particular state we're in, with activism seeming to be crumbling right now?
There's a bunch. Goat rope, clusterfuck. I think clusterfuck really applies. Jerry, what do you think?
Snafu.
I'm thinking we're at least at tar food.
Yeah.
What's TARFU? I know what snafu is. Situation normal. What's TARFU?
Things are really fucked up.
Oh, okay. That's interesting that Jerry's going for situation normal. Jerry, why do you say that?
Well, I think when you look at everything that's been going on, at least in the U.S., we have a wide variety of things, and I think some people who are activists, they're either saving their powder for the upcoming presidential
Okay.
election,
Okay.
or you had after the events of October 7th, a, a good amount of blowback on either side.
Yeah. What do you guys think about how organizations that have a specialty that is not the Middle East or hunger, poverty, or anything like that, like trans organizations, LGBTQ plus organizations, getting involved in things that are not in their wheelhouse? Because back in the day, we were always told, stay in your lane, don't speak outside of your area of expertise.
I'll say I agree. I was watching Bill Maher a few weeks ago, and he brought up the point that you had groups that said gays for Hamas. And he said, if you go over there, they will kill you. So you really don't know what the hell you're talking about.
It's interesting because the counterpoint I've heard to that is, well, we have to, fight injustice where we see it, and we can't just focus on things that only apply to us. And I personally, I think that's missing the actual point, in that I can speak somewhat coherently on certain subjects. Others I know nothing about. I'm good, or not enough for me to feel confident that I know what I'm talking about. I'm going to stay where I know what's going on, because the minute people can no longer trust the information they're getting from me, I'm not as effective anymore.
That's where partially that's where I'm at. I was asked to weigh in on ACAB, All Cops Are Bastards, and I really wasn't comfortable, because that's not my expertise. And I don't know who's out there in my audience. I know that many of them are, don't want to say refugees, but many of them are also part of your audience. And I don't want to violate people's trust, because I do have good long-term friends who I know by pattern of behavior are not bastards. I mean, that might be right bastards, but not because they're cops.
Right.
Sorry. So in an effort to be true to my audience and maintain that audience and not trying to scope creep, I stay the fuck away from things like that and Hamas, because that region of the world has been on fire since as long as I can remember. And if we haven't really solved it in 40 something years, you know what? I'll let better minds take care of that.
Yeah. Sorry, Jerry, go ahead.
I think for me, I'm a voracious reader, and I will read everything from multiple sources. And what got me is, shortly after everything that happened, you saw a lot of people who were activists saying, look, I'm Jewish. I marched for Black Lives Matter. I marched for this. Why isn't anybody marching for me?
Mm-hmm.
And I read a lot of that from various sources. And I think that raised a lot of awareness for folks. So to see people coming out and marching for other folks, it's going to be a while, because I stood for you and nobody stood for me.
Mm-hmm.
So that hopefully may cut down on some of the, I don't want to say mindless activism,
mm-hmm.
maybe the people who, from when I was working media, you see as the professional protesters.
Right.
I took a photo or video of somebody marching for trans lives. A week later, they want to ban guns. Week later, they're marching for the environment. Week later, they're marching for something else. I mean, they would march to march.
Right. Right. And when you see the same faces all the time, it starts to become less persuasive.
It does. And
Yeah.
I laughed with the reporter because we covered some of those folks when there was one of the major crises in Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
And we asked the question, if the Haitian people hate their government so much, why don't they rise up against them? And the response was from the guy who protested against assault rifles, saying they don't have any guns. They can't rise up. It's like, last week, weren't you saying nobody needs them?
That's what I find so odd about the professional activist class, because I'm sure you guys get the talking points memos that I do. And what I'm seeing in the guides is not what I'm seeing reflected online or on the street. I actually pulled up a screen grab. Tell me, Akila, when it's appropriate to talk about this, but what I got for Trans Day of Remembrance this past November. And I pulled it up so we can compare it to what everybody saw.
I actually saw a whole lot of nothing from most sources because the news cycles were consumed with the Houthi rebels, Trump's entanglements, and the conflagration between Gaza and Israel. So I saw a lot of nothing. I had a few videos on this channel, and that was really all I saw, except for, I think, messages from Georgia Equality. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I got things from Out Georgia Business and TGX 360, especially TGX 360. I mean, it's all about trans people. So, of course, they were involved in that.
Right.
Other than that, I didn't really see anything. I do really want to, pardon me, I do really want to touch on who these professional activists are trying to reach as their audience. Because it seems to me, I mean, I don't dig into all the talking points memo and I see a scout tail. I see not a lot coming from organizations, but I'm not dialed into a lot of them. So a lot of it I see filtered through individuals on Reddit and other internet forums, and they vary greatly. On r/translator, there are more people that are going to be in my age group. So there's a lot more nuance. As you get younger, they begin to get more and more and more and more radical and larger numbers. So the kids, God's love them, they're trying, and they don't realize that because they don't understand the nuance of being trans out in the world, they're making it worse for the people that are. And that's not necessarily their fault.
No.
They don't know what they don't know. And that's part of being a teenager. Yeah. But as people, I mean, Jerry, especially you, since you're not dialed into the trans community, we're using you basically as the sample of the every person.
Like,
okay. I mean, no pressure.
Jerry's good under pressure.
To be honest, since that's it, Leanna, if you hadn't mentioned it, I wouldn't have known because I
Known
saw
what?
about Trans Day of Remembrance.
Right.
I saw nothing. I heard nothing. I read nothing. And keep in mind, I read 5 newspapers a day, the AP feed, the Reuters feed.
See, that just tells you the difference between the US and Canada, because it was like top 10 stories on CBC.
Wow.
So, there's a lot more. I mean, we've got legislation, right? Our charter enshrines gender identity as a protected class, and so it's much more. Various levels of government are much more on side than in the US. The US is going the other way with a lot of anti-trans legislation. Obviously, it's not perfect. Manitoba, I know Saskatchewan passed some legislation. The provincial level governments are not as chill about it as the federal and municipal ones, and I think that's just because certain provinces do have significant rural communities where it takes longer for messaging to get in, and who really do not respond to, as you put it, Akila, the coercive practices, the if you don't use the right words, you're a bad person.
Right.
Tactics. Yeah. Yeah, but it's much more. I mean, I walk around with the "You are safe with me" badge. You know, the button, the rainbow, that "You are safe with me." But I've never had a problem walking around, my neighborhood on the edge of farm community. It's not a problem here.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, it shows what happens when there's actually persuasive messaging at a national level, instead of just the battle.
Well, I mean, what I've seen in terms of messaging, at least at the organizational level, has been relatively mute. Again,
Really?
I'm not dialed into a lot of the the more national networks, because I'll be honest, a lot of their traffic is fundraising.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, no, that's not for me. But I think that there is, even at the organizational level, a lot of the messaging gets drowned out because people are looking to Twitter and Reddit for these messages. And they're looking, my sense is that they're looking for controversy.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll go to subreddits like r/true scum, which is a purely trans medical community. And there's a place for that. I did my time as a very staunch trans medicalist because of the journey that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm able to talk to people, their stories influenced my thinking in a positive way, because no, not everybody is going to be in the depths of despair and has to claw their way out. And also, I don't see a lot of messaging aimed at middle America, like Mr. and Mrs. Everyday Joe and Jane. I don't see that messaging. There's a lot of preaching to the choir where their messaging revolves around whipping up an already agitated base.
Yeah.
I'm like, why the fuck are you concentrating on people that are already active and are climbing over each other to be at the pointy end of the spear?
Yeah.
We got to get those people in middle America headed in the right direction.
That's right.
Because, lives depend on it.
Yeah.
And for this whole thing to work, you have to have the full spectrum. And that's why I was so adamant about talking about audience, and especially who activists are not targeting for messaging.
Yep. And I mean, that's why I took the position I did on Hogwarts Legacy. We know now it was the best-selling game of 2023. And we saw that coming. It's a monster IP. Far more people know Harry Potter from the movies than the books. And so J.K. Rowling and whatever she thinks about anything is extremely far removed from their relationship with that property. And when you start, you only get someone's time so much. I think about it as, okay, you're doing an elevator ride with somebody, right? What message are you going to focus on in that 2 minutes when you have them in front of you and they are persuadable? And if you play a video game, you're a bad person is not the place I'm going to spend my time. These are human beings and I'm cool with it. And here's why you don't have to be scared. All this stuff you see on the internet, all this stuff you see on Project Veritas and, the Chris Rufo stuff and all that. No. That's, you find any group of people, you're going to find the extreme edge. That's not who we're asking you to accept. We're asking you to accept the regular person who's just getting on with their lives, who got, dealt a really lousy hand by genetics, and it's our job to try to understand. And this is where the language, if you say, this is where we have to understand God's plan, not try to tell them what it is, and
right.
That's the sort of messaging that's going to lose you in left-wing activist circles because you brought up God. But
Kitty wants attention.
Yeah, this is Scout. Yes. And, that's the thing, that no message is going to be, I'm preaching to the choir here, right? No message is going to work everywhere.
Right.
Yeah. And so you've got to tailor messages and be consistent enough that people can't see you saying one thing to one group of people and another thing to another group of people. You can't throw one group under the bus to appease another, but you do have to tailor. You have to use words that they understand, right? And the things that I hear that scare people are the idea of 42 different pronouns, the idea that they're going to have to make changes very, very quickly, and then there's going to be intense punishments for getting it wrong. And we know that's not true on average, but we can't say it doesn't happen. And that's the messaging challenge to the more, not just rural communities, but also immigrant communities where homophobia and gender are, major colonial constructs, and there is trauma there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would like to push back just a teeny tiny bit on something that you said, where you're referring to being trans, being dealt a crap hand by the genetic lottery. I actually have found a decent bit more humanity in my transition, and a lot more willingness to forgive. Now, not everybody.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's because you're an adult and you made lemonade out of lemons, though, right? I mean, obviously, no one wants to, the idea of choice, no one chooses to get a whole bunch of surgeries and take a whole bunch of medications and be monitored for bone density and all that stuff if there's a better option, right? That is the best option available to someone.
Yeah. Okay. That's
Let me push back on that one. There are some people who do like to go under the knife.
Yeah.
I guess, Liana, I have a problem with absolutes
Oh, sure. That's
when we
fair.
talk about anything.
Right.
CBS on their streaming service have been doing a lot of half-hour documentaries, and they did one on being trans youth.
Right.
okay.
And they talked to youths that were transitioning, their parents, and they talked to the other side.
Socially transitioning or medically transitioning?
At this point, it's a combination.
Okay.
And a lot of it was, why do I have to leave my home where I grew up because now I can't get the medication I may need?
Mm-hmm.
In one case, it was puberty blockers.
Yeah.
And they left.
Yeah.
But they also talked to the other side who were against it. And if I remember correctly, their main thing was, listen, we just want to make sure everybody is safe, that everybody has informed consent. They know what they're doing. They know the long term. I think if you want to reach out to folks, that's really the way to go. When I hear a lot of
sides.
Show both sides, right, and not you're wrong. We understand. We understand what you're saying, and these are our concerns, and both sides need to recognize that. I think one of the things from my foxhole is, and it doesn't matter what the activists are saying. Mm-hmm. As soon as I hear these are our demands and you have to do them.
Yes.
My initial attitude.
Yeah.
Go F yourself. No, I don't.
And that's just complete psychology. The thing about both sides is that the challenge for, especially in youth, and this is a really thorny thing precisely because we're getting into issues of who makes the call involving a minor, right? That you get all these issues that complicate it. The challenge for people who are advocating for access or, gender affirming care as a right, you get the what's the harm in waiting? Isn't it better to wait? The whole watchful waiting lobby has done a really, really good job of making that seem like a harmless, safe, when they're an adult, they can make any decision they want. And that's not the full picture.
But you can take that, because that was one of the arguments that was made. Mm-hmm. And you had the parents saying, all we're doing is putting puberty blockers in. As soon as we remove them, everything can go back to how the body was formed. So if the child is a trans girl and they put the puberty blockers in, you take the puberty blockers out, the trans girl will revert back to a boy at 18, and then it is their call.
Right. Here's the thing. And we've rabbit trailed a little too far into like the minutia of
and this is the problem
messaging.
With this advocacy, right?
Yeah. So when you take the wait and see, the female bone structure is locked into place at around age 16.
Yep.
The male skeletal structure gets locked into place around 18 to 21. That's when the growth plates fuse, and there's no room for the skeleton to adjust.
Yep.
Okay.
And the knock on that has is that trans people are more identifiable.
That's right.
Because if you think about it, I was having a conversation with someone and they thought that because I was on estrogen, that it would raise the pitch of my voice. It doesn't. Once your pharynx, which is what genders your voice, grows to a certain point, there's no going back. It doesn't shrink. And you're stuck with that voice. And you can either try and change it via surgery or intense voice therapy, not just, some, pardon me, vocal coaching, but you're talking about working with a voice pathologist, and it's fucking expensive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm stuck. If you notice, women have different shoulder geometries. The hips are a whole different class. All of those things affect the way you move,
Mm-hmm.
the way clothes hang on your body,
Mm-hmm.
and once your skeleton is locked in place, you cannot undo that without massive surgery. So you're forever identifiable.
Yep. Yeah.
And in the growing, in the heightening climate of ideology, that makes people targets. I was at an Out Georgia function, and I met a trans woman who had the good fortune of transitioning through puberty.
Mm-hmm.
I was absolutely convinced that this person was a cis woman. Everything. Unless you were up in her business,
Mm-hmm.
you would never have known. And when I say that, I mean, like, going down on her. Mm-hmm. Everything else was absolutely spot on. And that's why people are pushing for trans kids to have the puberty of their choice. Also, as far as surgeries go, there was a report out in the AMA that was a literature review, and they found that the regret rate for gender affirming surgeries, mm-hmm. and this is a 1-for-1, different names for different procedures, but it's the same procedure.
Mm-hmm.
And they found that the cis counterparts had a 13 times higher regret rate than their trans counterparts.
Yeah.
13 times.
Yeah. There's a huge regret rate with cisgender cosmetic surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And yet 16-year-old girls are allowed to get breast implants with parental permission. And a lot of people don't know that. And when I start talking to people about, they're like, well, I think we should protect kids. And I said, well, 16-year-olds for their sweet 16 gift get sent off to, fancy New York plastic surgeons for a nose job and breast implants. Well, I don't agree with that either. I said, but it's legal.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And people see the disparity there. They said, well, I don't think it should be legal either. I said, but nobody's doing very loud advocacy to get those procedures banned. And then I hear, but it's better for them. And this is where things get really complicated because it's better for their self-esteem, being more a greater gender ideal, being pretty for girls. One of the biggest cosmetic procedures for cisgender boys some cisgender boys grow breasts and they do top surgery on cisgender boys while they're minors because they don't want them bullied. They don't want them having that low self-esteem. They want them to be able to go swimming and do sports and all that stuff. And it's not these procedures are done. They know how to do them. The risk of them, it's serious surgery, but the risk of them is overstated in the fear tactics of the anti-trans advocacy. But the issue is we only talk about trans youth and these procedures. We don't talk about all youth in these procedures. And I think that ties into what Jerry said, is that it's much easier to do those. Well, we can make it look far simpler and more absolute if we just focus on trans kids, as opposed to opening up all kids. And the fact that these procedures, these things that they say are going to mutilate kids, they're happening to cisgender kids all the time with the exact same rate of complication. And
It is. I think, and maybe that should be part. If you're talking advocacy, maybe that should be part of the discussion for a male who has gynecomastia, which
That's
is
the
forming
term.
of breast
Yeah,
tissue.
that's the term.
If they're going to have that, okay, understand they have it with parental consent, and they've talked to, and they've talked to, and it's not medically necessary, but they do it so the young, in this case, a young man could have a better life. All
But
right.
Nobody tells that young man to wait because by 18 years old, you might be okay with it.
But at that point, is it a stereotype? You're wanting to be that better person, that more ideal
Exactly.
man.
Exactly.
So for a woman who says, listen, I'm small breasted, I want boys to look at me. You know, if you're going to talk about trans, and Keela, help me out here, wouldn't it be easier to say, oh, I hear you, but you do know that that this isn't done just to the trans community. This is done to the cis community as well, or to
It's
those
done across the board.
Yeah.
It's done across the board.
Yeah.
I apologize. I am going to put a pin in this one. I know that I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and I know that we can get long-winded. And we do have a few other sections that I do want to get into. And you both touched on the next one previously, the coercion. And Jerry, I'm looking to you to really put a fine point on it, because you've brought the gravity to your reactions of someone saying you have to do X, Y, and Z. You're like, fuck no, I don't.
No,
and
I don't.
So as the target of those kinds of messages, I mean, what's your bottom line that you want to get across to the people that are advocating like that?
If you're advocating for that, you're doing more harm than good.
Okay.
I understand it makes you feel better. You have to do this. I'm telling you. Well, who the fuck are you?
Yeah, that's what comes to mind.
That's emotional.
That's what comes to mind.
That's a documented thing.
During the Black Lives Matter protests, they were yelling at people who were eating dinner in outdoor restaurants. Really? Okay, get out of my face. If you want to try to make a point to me, say if I was if I was one of the activists advocating for the trans community, I would say, listen, can you help us? Here's what these kids are facing. The suicide rate is high. We're trying to protect. We're trying to help. For you in your life, it's not going to affect you that much, if at all, unless you have family who is trans. It's not. But this is what we are going through. But we can't do it without your help, without your, I don't want to say allyship, but if you don't agree, don't stand against us. Or if we're doing something that you don't understand, how can we help you understand this better?
Yeah, I don't completely understand why people want to use coercive tactics. If it works at all, it's usually short term, and you wind up making an enemy in the long run. I see it with gun rights. I see it with video games. It just doesn't work. It's never worked. I mean, granted, the KKK. It works.
There's a potential explanation for why they do it, if anybody's interested.
Actually, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There was a study that came out right end of November in the periodical Current Psychology. They studied feminist activism, but I do think that if we continue to do other areas of activism, they've actually found that people with dark personalities high narcissistic, Machiavellian, so on and so forth. People with high narcissistic traits are attracted to, and I'm quoting the paper here, political and social activism, not for the achievement of pro-social goals, but to repurpose the activism to satisfy their specific ego-focused needs.
I was reading that the synopsis article that linked to that study, and yeah, my wife was asking along the same lines, like how many people are using activism just to bully people, and how many were high school bullies that never evolved past that.
Also, people with somewhat shaky we talk about self-worth a lot, but we don't talk about self-concept. And people get into activism as teenagers when it's forming. And so instead of moving on to an individuated identity, they end up being, well, this thing, I got attention and a lot of it was positive. So this is me, this single identifier, this single thing is me. And at that point, they're not advocating from a persuasive place. It's identity defense at that point. Whenever somebody comes at them with a, if we're all sitting back here as professionals, it's a very, very reasonable critique. But I know firsthand, I am really struggling with all the Zionist flying around right now, because it is sometimes a dog whistle. And so I have to really strap myself down and step away from the keyboard sometimes, because I know it's no longer academic for me at that point. It is personal. And so I do think there does need to be dialogue that's not on the internet in community, so that people can have that reaction without it being where everybody can see it. I mean, we stepped in the middle of one just earlier this week, where somebody was just being a bully and they were using the language of advocacy, and it was a trans woman bullying another trans woman. And that is when it's no longer advocacy. First of all, I think activism is not advocacy. They're different things with different language. I don't consider myself an activist. I consider myself an advocate. Secondly, when you are in the middle of it, it is very difficult to take those difficult questions and not lunge eventually. And the problem is that people on the opposition, they know that. And so they just keep dog whistling those points. They keep hitting those points. They hit those pain points. And all they have to do is have, especially a trans woman, snap once in public. And then there she is, the big bad closet predator, stereotype, violent, out of control. It's a war of attrition, and it's forcing trans people to fight a war against themselves. And that is torture.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Let me take it back a little bit. Akila, I remember being downrange, and the bullying, the threatening. Threats work if you carry them out. We demand you do this. But it doesn't matter if it's here.
It's not a threat if you actually carry it out. It's a promise.
Yeah.
It's a promise.
Threats are empty by nature.
Mm-hmm.
When the U.S. says, like with the Houthis, if you continue to do this, we will do this. There's no bravado. There's no intimidation. It's fuck around and find out. And well, they found out.
Mm-hmm. But what
incoming Jen?
The find out is what happens the next time. I think when we're talking about this, the young person, I demand this. No, what are you going to do? The hollow threat. You cannot force mainstream America, for lack of a better term, to do something they don't want to do.
Yeah.
Because they'll say, I don't care. It doesn't affect me.
Yep.
You're wasting my time.
And that's why I think the messaging should be, you're absolutely right. It doesn't affect you. So why all this legislation banning it?
Because we're trying, the biggest thing out there, and I know we've had this in some of our other conversations, we're trying to protect the kids.
Right.
You have to make the argument, you're right, it doesn't affect you, but for those it affects, this is how it affects them. And all we're trying to do is better their lives.
Yeah. And that's a really effective message, that the more coercive pressure you attempt to put on people who very understandably, sorry, Jen is applying coercive pressure right now. Thank you for the
She just had butted me in the boob.
yes.
Yeah.
I can see that. Like, there we go. That is coercive pressure. Cats are masters of F around and find out. But yeah, a coercive message isn't an effective counter against, we just want to protect kids, right? Because that's reasonable. Right. That's a lofty goal. You need to be dismantling the fact that it is protection, instead of what I argue these bills are. These banning trans care, and I know it's just a detail so that we're not being too abstract. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole. Protection is making sure this stuff has supervision. Psychologists are involved. Doctors are involved. There is some oversight. That is how you protect kids. When you take away a doctor's right to prescribe medicine that actually is a coercive policy, it's not protecting any kid. It's denying a doctor, who is the expert here, the ability to make a judgment call. And it is so out of step with every other message of, the Second Amendment. We have a right to earn, to bear arms. Well, we have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as well. What the heck happened to that? And I think that we do have to show that because we're talking about laws here. We're not talking about what to call people on a one-to-one basis. Those are completely separate issues. And the problem is, the minute you open this can of worms, you have to deal with all of them all at once. And
which is complete bullshit.
And the minute, Jerry's right, the minute you go, I demand on anything, you've lost. You do have to run a perfect game in that regard. You do. And I think the 1/3 rail you can't step on.
But you run a small game.
Yeah. Yes. You have to contain the scope of the conversation. Are we talking here about pronoun use? Are we talking here about coercive legislation that denies doctors the ability to do their jobs? You can't do both at the same time.
But that's the difference between, talking to someone face to face, or in this case, virtually face to face as we are, and talking to someone in cyberspace where, you're hidden behind, your screen name, and you can lie about whatever demographic information to Kat. I love you.
Jen, excellent visual aid. Jen, thanks for the assist.
She'll be back. I can almost guarantee it.
Cats do not hide. I mean, that you're right as well. One of the things I do, I always use my real name. I always use my face in my profile pictures. I do not hide behind alt accounts. I don't do that, because the minute I get caught doing that, I'm significantly less effective.
Yeah.
I think visibility really does matter. And, the persuasion is hard. And that's why I pulled up the talking points document that I got for Trans Day of Remembrance, because it actually outlines how to do a persuasive argument. And I was sitting back seeing that distributed. And people from the very organizations that distributed the document went coercive.
Mm-hmm.
They know it's wrong. They did it. So we're not operating from make a plan, execute the plan. Something's happening here to derail that process because we all know what works. People just aren't doing it.
I would have to say that it's profit motive.
Really?
There's no money in nuance because everyone's chasing social media engagement, and we all know enragement is engagement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you have to feed the algorithm, and the algorithm is skewed toward things that get people riled up. Most of my videos don't have any sort of hashtags, and the ones that get the most interaction outside of a core community are the ones where I'm using hashtags where people are looking for that controversy, and when they don't find it, they click off really, really, really quickly.
Yeah.
And that's priming us for conflict, for using coercive language because we're angry.
And validating the anger and doing it right at the same time is definitely a walking and chew gum exercise.
Yeah. I mean, this whole channel, I have to be completely honest, came out of my therapy, because I had to talk about the things that are negatively affecting my life and trying to not only make sense of them and also trying to do good with it. Because, Jerry will tell you, I got that bug, that service. I have to serve the people of the United States in a meaningful and beneficial way. And that's not somebody telling me I have to do that. That's coming from inside. That's my motivation.
That's what makes you feel fulfilled.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's challenging when getting the message out that we can do better. And this is how, gets quashed because people just want to be angry. They want to be outraged.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why when I had you on my stuff, I said to Akila, I want to have you on a bunch of times for other things. I don't want to have you on for being trans, because I do think part of the issue is that trans people get flattened into that one thing, and they're being coerced into being trans Barbie, right? There actually was a trans lady Barbie. Dr. Barbie was played by a trans woman in the movies. So I want to clarify, I'm not talking about that. It's like, here is the platonic ideal of a trans woman. And it's this teeny tiny pedestal where the minute they have an opinion on anything else that somebody disagrees with, oh, you're not properly trans anymore. That's awful. No one can run that gauntlet. Nobody can get through that. That's just, you're setting.
Oh, I was screwed from the get-go because I was a veteran that decided to transition. And, that negates two big aspects of who I am. I'm not the right kind of trans person. And I'm also not the right kind of veteran. And Jerry, I know you've seen it. The vet flakes are ferocious.
Yeah.
What do you mean? For somebody who doesn't know, I'm going to be audience proxy here. Tell me what that means.
What, vet flake?
Yeah.
So think of all of the negative stereotypes about being a snowflake and then map it onto an ultra machismo, usually white persona.
Okay.
And how that could go so completely sideways.
I have I work with somebody who's dealing with a guy like that right now. He's not able to balance his identity as a gay man and a veteran. And so he goes way into that roar, 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 almost pulling a trad. It's like an overcompensation thing to try to be, yeah.
And I think part of that is because the military stuffs you into a very, very narrow bandwidth of, who you can be on the outside.
Yeah.
And some people internalize the Kool-Aid. I'm still deprogramming, and I've been out now I just marked my 7th anniversary of being a civilian again.
Wow. I mean, I relate to that from the activism side. It's funny because I see some of the stuff people are pulling now. I say, oh my God, that was me when I was 15 years old doing like marriage equality and violence against women. And it's like, because if no one's there, even if somebody's there to teach you what not to do, you don't listen.
Because you know better.
Yeah, you think you
don't.
know
You
it
think
all.
you do.
Yeah, you think the strength of your convictions makes you right. And it takes a few screw ups to realize, oh, no, not at all. Yeah.
The Brown tornado was famous for saying, there's no sense like bot sense.
Yeah. It's there was a thing in the 90s where it was a little different because we were aware we were going into these environments where violence against us was acceptable. Yeah, especially the men. Like, we were responsible for making sure we didn't say something that would get our buddy's ass beat, right? So we could not coerce, but every so often, one of these, more overtly, flamboyantly gay guys would just lose it and get in one of these guys' faces. And then we'd have to de-escalate because it'd be like, whoa. We don't have the superior force here. We called it gay bashing back then. We didn't have the legislation to protect against it back then. You can't write checks with your mouth that your body can't cash. And so it was, and I mean, I was dealing with the intersection of a racialized neighborhood, and we called it gay rights at the time. We didn't call it LGBTQ plus. But that, because there was so much, destruction of culture with the gender bending traditions in Afro-Caribbean communities, it was legitimate homophobia. There was a fear when somebody found, it was a real fear. And you deal with a frightened person differently than you deal with an angry person. And that, I mean, I think Jerry spoke to that as well, that if you really got to listen to people before you start speaking, and this is the problem with social media, that unless you're looking to respond to people, which, is like walking up to somebody while they're having a nice dinner with a friend and screaming in their face, you have to do the affirmative message first and then have people pick it apart. It is possible to do nuance on social media, but it is a challenge.
Yeah,
it is. It's and I think that the overwhelm element on social media, so a lot of people are like, just please make it simple, just tell me what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, I think that was one of the reasons why that engine metaphor works, because it's just like, let me strip all of the emotion out of it. It's like, do you understand this versus this? It's like, okay, what happens if you put diesel in a gasoline engine? It's like, that's no good.
Yeah.
I mean, I've yet to interact with someone who says that doesn't cringe at that.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, now what would happen if you're talking to a cis woman, it's like, hey, what would happen if I pumped you full of testosterone? What would happen to your brain? Usually the answer is like, nothing good. It's like, okay, now imagine if somebody, through no fault of their own, gets a brain that's mismatched to their own,
Yeah.
their own body's hormones. You're like, oh, that's what's going on. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
And people can grok that, and they usually have a very visceral reaction.
Because
But
that's taking it out of the realm of it's just a feeling.
Yeah, because there's no real language to talk about what does dysphoria feel like, and then you get stumbling over people's languages
Yeah.
and trying to describe something accurately in a way that you can convey that to a stranger. And I think this is a good way to segue back into the final point, is really where I want to drill down on. As an activist, you serve the TGX or trans and gender expansive community.
Mm-hmm.
We don't serve you.
That needs to be put on like stickers and posters, and that's an important one.
Jerry, you've been remarkably quiet. I mean, from an external point of view, and reaching into your media background and your public affairs background, why would you say that this chunk is important?
This chunk is important because the activists, if they act up, if they act out, if they piss me off and I don't want to listen to the message, they're not hurting them, they're hurting you.
Yeah.
I mean, Akila, when you and I first talked about you transitioning, we had a long phone conversation. And I've mentioned that to a few friends. And I said, a friend of mine decided to transition. And I asked them why. And the response was, I look at myself naked in the mirror every day, and it looks like I'm looking at somebody else's body, and I can't take it anymore. So I'm either going to transition or kill myself. And when I tell people that, they're like, yep, got it.
Yeah.
Understand. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And this person was an adult. They had done a lot of things. And they said they couldn't take it anymore. To them, it was what they were looking at. They knew it wasn't what the reflection in the mirror wasn't who they believed they were. And most people who I mentioned that to go, well, it sounds like gender dysphoria. I go, yeah. So if you want to if you're an activist and you're not serving the community you're trying to advocate for, then the only person you're actually helping is yourself, because you're the professional activist, and you need to stop because you're doing more damage.
Yeah. There really needs to be a first do no harm principle in advocacy. I mean, I'll give you a shining example of one with people I work with, because I work with some what we call trans masculine trans guys, and there's this whole campaign of men can get pregnant, right? That is actively triggering the body dysphoria, the gender dysphoria of trans men who have not even the ones that have gone through the surgery, and so that's not physically capable anymore. That is still nightmare fuel for these guys. And that's an example of, okay, best of intentions, right? Because we do need trans-friendly gynecological care, because people have different parts of transition. Trans men have to get services, but focusing on pregnancy instead of all the other things those services provide, I think because people don't like talking about the gynecologist, it's created this real problem for trans guys where they can't look at the stuff that's supposed to be advocating for them without wanting to run away from their own skin. And it's like, that's That's a huge mistake. Like, that's friendly fire.
Yeah. And that's a good way of putting it. It's friendly fire.
Yeah. Like, you're harming the people you claim to speak for. Same thing with the people, we have to deal with the comorbidity is such a terrible term, but the reality that trans people are not just trans. There are other mental health conditions that people will have. Some of them are extremely serious. It is an extremely challenging process to separate the gender dysphoria from everything else that's going on. And the process is so humiliating for some people to transition because it's so medical, and you basically have to prove one step, another step that you are who you say you are, that a lot of countries don't even allow name changes without an affirmative reason. You have to have an active good reason to change your name, and that just a name change, right?
Actually, there was an interesting case here in Georgia that went up to the Georgia Supreme Court. A trans man went in for a name change, and the judge said, well, that's not a suitably feminine name.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to change it.
Yeah.
It took an additional 4 years for that case to work its way up to the Supreme Court. And amazingly, the Georgia Supreme Court said, no, if they meet all the criteria, you get the name change. That is the law.
And everybody knows how you just want to lose it when something that should be fairly simple takes way too long. Mm-hmm. Everybody in this room has been there, right? 5 years to get a diagnosis of an autoimmune disease. So that's how I think about that. Think about the personal hell that person is in with something that should be just a matter of, I want to change my name. There's a legal process for doing it. I'm going to do it. That's not protecting kids. That's not, medical regret. It's a name change. It's the thing we expect a lot of women to do when they get married. It's so bizarre. And that's the kind of stuff that I think that is serving the community to go out there and have the conversations. And I know for me, having the different perspectives that they tell me, and then I go and talk about it so they can stay anonymous, because some people I work with aren't out, or they're only partially out. They have abusive family members that would never accept it. So I can go and I can talk about this and I can get it out there. And so they don't have to be they can talk about it. They can feel heard. They can have those angry moments. They can express the frustration. And there isn't the onslaught that, I'm quite happy. I'm quite happy to weather,
For those people that want to tell their story, I would like to open my channel up and let them come and anonymously tell their story.
Yeah, I think that's great because that's powerful. People can relate. Like I said, you can relate to something just being way too hard. I see Jerry nodding a lot. Like, yeah, that makes sense to him. That's what you want. Yeah,
it does make sense. And I noticed a little bit of a reaction when I mentioned how I share, in a way, your story. I think part of it is too many times we beat around the bush on things. And if we're going to be blunt, if we're going to be direct, a good friend of mine, somebody I served with downrange, somebody I give a damn about, said, I need to do this, I'm going to kill, or I'm going to hurt myself, I'm going to kill myself.
Yeah.
If you're going to talk about kids transitioning, that we've all know the suicide rate for trans kids is high. So you want to save kids, you want to help them, okay, let them transition. If you're worried about them making a decision that is faddish in your mind, if you don't think it's right, put up they have to have parental consent at a certain age. They have to have 2 or 3 doctors agree that this is necessary.
Well, that's also why you want to do the social transition around 12 years old, because if it is just a phase, if they think they're doing it to be cool, they'll change their hair, they'll change their clothes, they'll change their name, they'll get it out of their system. By the time we have to think about puberty blockers, they've moved on.
They moved
Right.
on.
Yeah.
The child is alive.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So if you want to be an activist, be polite, be professional,
Yeah.
and sometimes be direct. This is the cause and effect.
That's
I mean, I know they probably don't do it, and this is an age thing. Because I remember my daughter, when she got driving lessons, she didn't see the old crash videos from the 50s that I had some knuckleheads in my classes. We watched it 2 or 3 times.
I did
Oh
that.
God.
I did that.
I remember the suicide doors, what happens when they called the old suicide doors that opened the other way, and then they would hit the tree and the door would smush the person. You see that 2 or 3 times, you know what? I ain't gonna drive without my seatbelt.
Yep.
They show the hole where the body went through. Hey, guess what?
Yep.
I'm putting that seatbelt on.
The
Sometimes,
shop class horror stories. Yeah.
but sometimes you have to do that to say, well, we're protecting, we're changing the name of it. No. At the end of the day, if you have people, if you really give a damn about people and they're like, I can't take it anymore, I need to do something,
Mm-hmm.
then for fuck's sake, do it.
And
I had somebody who I served with, an outstanding individual. They came back from multiple deployments and they couldn't take it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the PTSD got too bad, they took themselves out.
Yeah. I've seen that. I've seen that too many times. And
Yeah.
And sometimes because nobody had the cojones to say, hey,
Uh-huh.
and if you're going to be an active messaging, if you want to be an advocate, if you want to get the thing across to, as Walter Winchell used to say, Mr. and Mrs. America and all the ships at sea, be direct. Hey, this is what these kids are going through.
Right.
This is what the trans community is going through.
and that was one of the reasons why I recorded my path transition, because, by the time you and I had that conversation, Jerry, that had been a reality for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
And the fact that I survived that long is a miracle in and of itself. And why, the question I ask is, why would you condemn someone to walk that path when you know that there's a different way?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, because, and I mean, the thing about you, Akila, is you are exceptionally good at communicating this stuff. And the problem with dysphoria is because it's a mismatch. A lot of trans people don't have the vocabulary that you do. You know how to message, but you've also, because you were in the military, because you have done a lot of work, you have the vocabulary, you have the metaphors. And what I've found with a lot of people that I work with is that there's a lot of work with vampires right now, for instance, because it's a change. You got turned into a vampire and now you have to do all this stuff that you don't necessarily want to do, but you have to do that kind of stuff. And certain things that'll be a movie or a game or something like that. And they're like, that's it. That's what it's like. And suddenly they have a tool to talk about it. But being able to take the abstract feeling and put it into words the way you do is rare. It is probably part of the reason you are still with us. Thank the gods. Because you were able to, and still are, talk yourself through it. A lot of people who don't know what's happening to them don't have the words, that makes the whole thing incredibly difficult, because now we do have the responsibility of speaking for. And I think that a more mosaic approach to this of, look, just if somebody asks you to call them something, call them that. You can ask questions, but please just call them at first, ask questions second. I there's a few newer pronouns that I'm getting used to lately that feel weird to me, but I do it. Well, I try to understand it, right? That kind of stuff, that is simpler for someone to understand than the really scary, the minute kids become involved, right, Jerry? It just becomes a whole new ballgame.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is that a lot of people that have these knee-jerk reactions are parents, and it makes sense because they think about their own kids and what would happen if. And I know if I was a parent, I'd be scared shitless. And I think that's actually one of the critical errors that activists commit, is they don't, when people talk about it, they insert a lot of bravado, and there's a lot of confrontational language, and it's masking the genuine fear of, what do I do if this is my kid?
And I think on the gender critical side, enunciation, there's also, what if, I relate to this, because when I first started hearing about all this stuff, all the rationalizing and lying I did to myself about what it meant to be me just came roaring up. And I had to go, hold on, wait, just because this is true for me doesn't mean it's true for someone else. And again, it's that identity threat, right? When you think you're bad at being a woman, it's different than feeling like not a woman. And I feel that way sometimes too. And, having, being recovering anorexic and experiencing body dysmorphia, as, I just had a flare up of that over the holidays and it was miserable. And so it's like, all right, dysphoria is a lot more real for me when people describe it, because I can relate to I want to vomit, looking at myself in the mirror. It's not what it should be. Yeah. And if people have come to that and they're not okay with their own gender terror, let's say, they can have a really extreme reaction to someone who was willing to go, I'm going to do a radical act of self-acceptance. It can be very scary. Yeah. So I'm sure the people who talk to J.K. Rowling, they see her fear is real. They respond to that very real fear. And so you get a lot of people protecting her based on that emotional response instead of the god-awful stuff that comes out of her mouth.
Yeah. I also think that a lot of activists try to fact people to death instead of trying to tell a story. And Jerry, I think it was absolutely amazing that you chose to condense my story and relay it to someone else to help them understand. People, as a general rule, do better when they're offered a story instead of confronted with facts. It's like, it goes down a lot smoother, and it's like, hey, you're wrong. Here's why. Boom, boom, boom. And they feel like they're being lectured. It's like, okay, I see where you're at. Let me tell you my buddy's story.
Mm-hmm.
I also, from this one particular client I work with who's on the other side, who wants to understand the whole thing and is having intense trouble, one of the things that's been conveyed to me there is that change is effort. change is an investment. They want some reassurance that that investment is going to be worth it. And people don't feel like the investment's worth it when you're attacking them and telling them they're a bad person. They think it's worth it when you're willing to walk with them, let them mess up. I still mess up they, them pronouns all the time. Mess it up all the time. We have a non-binary member of a group that we work with, and we're all, we're always we're all stumbling over it, and it becomes a bit funny. But because we're all being awkward together, it can actually make the non-binary person feel more supportive because they see the effort.
Yeah. To go along with that, when I had my surgery down at the VA, my dad took me, and the staff, because of a conversation that I had with one of my pre-op people, like all of the staff, it was ma'am and her, and nobody dropped the ball except my dad. And he did it in front of the medical professionals, and they're all looking at me like, "Are you okay?" And I'm just like, "Come on, Dad." And I wasn't like beating him over the head. It was just sort of, okay, poke, poke, haha. And he realized that I was, I thought it was funny versus getting angry. And because I know he's trying. And he does such an amazing job at putting in the effort. And that was one of the things that I did when I first started. Jerry, I know you saw those posts. I'm like, you're not the pronoun police. More importantly, you're not my pronoun police. If I see that, I'm going to have an issue with you, not the person who's getting it wrong. Of course, use your best judgment. If somebody's being an asshole about it, they're being an asshole about it, and you can jump their shit for being an asshole. But I get the feeling of why messing up the pronouns is such a thing. Because for people with really extreme gender dysphoria, it's like a knife in the back that gets twisted. And I get that. And especially for people that you don't come into contact with every day, they don't know you. They don't know your story. Right. And being angry over a stranger, I don't understand. I understand the hurt of not being gendered correctly because you're not presenting an XYZ enough way. But I know that being trans, spoons run low fast.
Yeah.
So just pick your battles. But that's an individual thing, not an activist thing. And the less policing of behavior the activists do, the better off everyone is.
That's well put. Well put. I mean, that person.
Because nobody wants to deal with the Stasi.
Well, and people can't be on all the time. There's got to be space for people if they choose to advocate, if they choose to, get involved. They have to be able to step back and be able to be a human with feelings, and not a role model all the time.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I think Jerry, go ahead.
These things, and I think this is one of the things that activists miss. They want everything to happen today. I forget what I was watching. But there is a movie streaming called Fellow Travelers.
Okay.
It's about closeted gay men in DC.
Okay.
Mhm.
I don't want to say in the 60s, maybe. Growing up, when I was growing up, and roughly that time frame ish, you would never see that. Oh, hell no. That is not going to be anywhere in the mainstream. Not even close. The closest anything that came to drag or men dressing up as women, let alone open homosexuality,
Mhm.
was Monty Python,
Bugs
some of
Bunny.
the old
Bugs Bunny.
humors like Some Like It Hot, that kind of stuff.
The Robin Hood Disney movie.
The Rocky Horror Picture Show,
Yeah. Yeah.
but men kissing on, oh hell no. Saw that the other day when it came on. It's like, okay, things take time. If you are to advocate, you have to play the long game.
Yeah.
You have to make people feel comfortable. You're introducing new ideas. Yes, people who are trans have been around for centuries. But in today's modern world, we're used to looking at it through the modern lens. Back then, well, who's that guy dressed as a woman? Oh, that's John. John does that. He's a good guy, but John's that. And we call him John. He likes to be called Jane, but
Mhm.
not a bad person. And that
Yeah.
person is usually accepted in their small community.
Yeah.
Nowadays, the small community doesn't exist because everybody wants to throw things out there and look at us and look what I found and this is. No. I saw a great meme recently about the Titanic sinking. And they said if the Titanic sank today, you'd see everybody in their life just bobbing in the water, holding up a cell phone as the ship goes down.
I saw that. Yeah. I saw that.
People don't realize that a lot of people made it off the boat and then they froze to death in the water.
That's right. Yeah.
They're so busy taking a photo of this. Look what I saw. Look at this. Guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an old saying when it comes to politics, and I think it does fit for this discussion. And the old saying was, all politics is local.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to advocate for somebody who's trans or try to explain it, keep it local.
Yeah.
Keep it simple.
Yep.
I tell people when I tell your story, it's like, look, this is a buddy of mine. This is what happened. And they say, how do you feel? I said, look, we joke. At the end of the day, we ended it with, so what I'm hearing is same asshole, different packaging. And it was, yeah.
That was my line. What was it? It was like,
that was mine. You agreed.
It's like, I'm the same person, just more hips, tits, and sass.
Yeah, same asshole, different packaging. Yeah.
Yeah. And I personally, I tell people, you know what? Learning a new experience is good for me because it stops me from getting complacent. It stops me from thinking I know it all. And it's a reminder that sometimes the best thing you can do is just shut your mouth and listen.
Yeah.
I do want to bring this one in for a landing. We're 11 minutes over. I do want to continue this one in a future episode because I think talking about activism versus advocacy, I think is helpful to a lot of people because there's so much of what not to do. And I think putting information out there of how to do it effectively and compassionately, I think is important and useful. And I think with everybody's communication backgrounds and disparate experiences, I think we can make some positive changes.
And I'm always interested in what you're going to wear because your wardrobe is always fabulous.
Thank you. I do appreciate it. I do try and look decent on set. And okay, I'm gonna flare. Okay, you broke Aquila. All right.
Dart? Mistletoe dart?
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Yes,
The best
finally!
kind.
Great one. Didn't get through one without one. Yeah.
Liana, final thoughts.
I think I just made them.
Okay.
My hair's still not dry from watching it before I did this stream. We could not be more different in this way. And I, as somebody who used to do that, like used to pin up model, I know how much work this takes. So I make sure to appreciate, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jerry, take us in.
Final thought. Don't yell at me. Make me understand. If you tell me I have to, I'll tell you to fuck off. Tell me why I want to. Make me give a damn.
Basic storytelling. All right. Thank you to you two for the gift of your time.
Jen.
Thank you for the gift of your time, Kitty. And for everybody out there in YouTube land, thank you for the gift of your time. Please be well. Please be safe. And as usual, take charge.